Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this session of Tadaima, which is on the monument at the Tulare Assembly Center project. My name is Koji Laozawa, and I am currently a postdoc fellow at UCLA. I'm an archaeologist, and I've worked on the archaeology and history of Japanese American incarceration. It's my great pleasure today to present to you this fantastic panel really just incredible luminaries, activists, people who have been working from a variety of different places and experiences on remembering the Tulare Detention Center. Today, we're going to start with a short presentation by Michael Paul Mendoza and the current and former students from Mission Oak High School's Cultural History class in Tulare, California, and they're going to give us some background on the work they've been doing and where they're at with getting a monument and memorial at the Tulare County Fairgrounds. This will be followed by a panel discussion moderated by myself with Michael Paul, the students from the Cultural History class, and then several former incarcerees and descendants who I'll introduce after Michael Paul's presentation. So I'll hand the floor over to Michael Paul and his students, and they'll get us started.
Well, thank you very much. It's so wonderful to see everyone here this evening joining us today. The students are going to do all of the explaining of our project. What I'd like to do this evening is first start with a news clip from about 2 summers ago from a wonderful presentation done at the Tulare Historical Museum here in town about Japanese American incarceration, and specifically here at the Tulare Assembly Center. So if you don't mind joining me in watching this brief news clip.
Every fall, families flock to the Tulare County Fairgrounds for the fun and food at the county fair. But what many don't know is it's where thousands of Japanese American families spent some of their darkest days. Following the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japanese Americans were ordered to leave their homes and the lives they knew behind. Over the span of about 6 months in 1942, about 5,000 people were ordered to report to what was known as the Tulare Assembly Center. From there, Japanese American families were sorted into internment camps across the country.
Women and children and the elderly. You know, it was families that were put in prison.
A group of Mission Oak High School students want to make sure what happened in their hometown 80 years ago isn't forgotten. In 2016, the students of Mr. Michael Paul Mendoza's U.S. Cultural History class were shocked to learn there wasn't a plaque or memorial to honor the history. So they started working towards a symbol that would be preserved at the fairgrounds forever.
When we lose this generation who lived through it, we can still remember what they lived through.
The effort was passed down from class to class. Now, with approval for a monument granted by the Fair's Board of Directors, Thursday, students have the opportunity to take some of the Japanese American men and women who lived at the camp as children back.
Truly a magical moment just to know that these people have all this history that they share together.
The older generation told their personal history, and the younger generation shared their ideas of how it could be preserved. This rendering, including cherry blossom trees, a statue, and educational plaques, is what a monument at the entrance of the fairgrounds might look like.
Having that moment to pause and reflect on what happened in Tulare is going to be a really eye-opening experience for a lot of our community members.
At the Tulare Historical Museum Thursday, it was standing room only, as community members gathered to hear from the internees.
People cried. We cried because they didn't know when we were going to come back, if we were going to come back.
Mr. Mendoza says the community is welcome to contribute their ideas to bring the monument to life.
This is the kind of student project that is going to leave a legacy, not just in this town, but in this county, in this community, and in this state.
Alyssa Flores, ABC 30 Action News.
So, as you can imagine, I get to be the very proud teacher, of these students who've been working on this project now for the past several years. You see them here on the screen now, as well as others that probably can't fit on the screen. So, without further ado, what I'd like to do is now turn it over to the students. Not so much to give a brief history of incarceration. I know we have a very unique audience here this evening who we think most people joining us tonight are familiar with this history. Rather, instead tonight, the students are going to give a presentation on their project and on the progress that we've been making toward making our goal of building a monument at the Tulare County Fairgrounds possible. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to screen share once more to get ready for our student presentation.
In 2016, students of the Cultural History class at Mission Oak High School created a class project to increase historical awareness about the incarceration of Japanese Americans at the Tulare County Fairgrounds in 1942. As part of our curriculum, our class conducts in-depth research of Japanese American incarceration during World War II.
In years past, our class made presentations to the entire student body by visiting each social study classroom and sharing this history. We now make these presentations to local civic organizations, focusing specifically on the internment history at the Tulare County Fairgrounds, for the purpose of building support for a memorial at the fairgrounds that honors all those interned during World War II. We have also established several important community partnerships, including the Tulare County Fair Board and CEO, the Tulare Historical Museum, and the Manzanar National Historic Site. We have now established the Tulare Assembly Center Memorial Planning Committee, which includes the Tulare County Fairgrounds CEO, Mrs. Dina Rizzardo, our teacher, Mr. Michael Paul Mendoza, and the students and alumni of the Mission Oak Cultural History class.
The Cultural History class aims to bring importance to local U.S. history. In this case, it would be the Japanese American incarceration, out of the shadows through research and educational awareness. Most of the fairgrounds that were used as War Department temporary internment camps, also known as assembly centers, have installed plaques or monuments honoring those impacted by this history. However, the Tulare County Fairgrounds, which is registered by the California Office of Historic Preservation as a historical landmark number 934, has no such markers present.
The Cultural History class spends the first month of each school year conducting research and learning about Japanese American incarceration. Students read Farewell to Manzanar and various articles, watch documentaries and films, and even invite special guest speakers such as Mrs. Nancy Bellin, who shares her experience and culture with the class. We have even designed a unique t-shirt of the Tulare Assembly Center, which we wear during our community presentations. These shirts are now available for purchase through the online store of the Tulare Historical Museum.
On March 1st, 2022, the Cultural History class invited Tulare County Fair CEO, Ms. Dina Rizzardo, for a class visit. The students wanted to personally share this history with her and to propose the construction of a monument at the Tulare Fairgrounds. Ms. Rizzardo pledged her full support in helping the students reach their goal. She scheduled the students as an action item for the Fair Board meeting on April 26, 2022.
Following the students' presentation, the Fair Board took a vote and unanimously approved the monument. Although the monument is still in the design phase, it has been decided by the Fair Board that it will be prominently located at the main entrance of the fairgrounds.
After researching other Japanese American incarceration monuments, the students created a design that included elements they felt would be appropriate in Tulare. Initially, the monument was to include a bronze statue of a father and daughter entering the camp, Japanese garden landscaping, informational storyboards, and large bronze plates with the names of all the internees.
However, after hosting several Japanese American incarceration survivors and descendants of the fairgrounds on June 23rd of 2022, students asked for their perspectives and input and modified the monument to include their feedback. The centerpiece of the monument will now be a 5-foot by 8-foot bas-relief bronze wall that will depict all members of a family as they are entering the Tulare Assembly Center. The committee has also commissioned artist Sam Pena, who is a local historian and sculptor, who also has been commissioned by the White House for other prominent bas-relief projects in Washington, D.C.
On the evening of June 23rd, following the visit at the fairgrounds, we invited our guests for a special presentation at the Tulare Historical Museum. There, the students presented a brief historical overview of Japanese American incarceration, followed by a 90-minute panel by those who experienced it. In fact, we honored that several of our guest panelists that night, they're here tonight, they were there that evening, we're very honored about that. And according to the museum curator, it was the largest attended event that was ever held at the museum. It reached standing room only. One of our panelists was lifelong Tulare resident Alice Nanamura, who with her family was sent to the Fresno Assembly Center and then to the Jerome Relocation Center in Arkansas. Unfortunately, Alice passed away 3 months after the event at the museum. We are very fortunate and honored to have the chance to meet her and all of our special guests and have listened to their stories. We are determined more than ever to get the monument at the Tulare Fairgrounds complete in the next 2 years so that all people who traveled through the Tulare Assembly Center can be remembered and recognized. Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, so there you have it. We tried to, as best as we could, summarize what we've been doing since 2016 to make this monument a reality. So we greatly appreciate and thank Tadaima for inviting us to allow us to share the work that we are trying to do. And we are now close. We are now in the fundraising phase of our monument. It still yet needs to be designed as far as the layout. We do have, as mentioned, now the centerpiece that's currently under production. The sculptor is working on a mock to start, the casting process. This will take about a year. So while we're still designing the monument itself, now we're going out. The students are now going out, making presentations to local civic organizations, our local city council. The fairgrounds CEO has a grant writer who is also working on obtaining grants to help fund our project. We estimate that the total amount of this monument will cost upwards of $350,000. I am very proud to say within the last year, the students have succeeded in raising about $100,000 of that amount. Some of that has been donated by the Tulare City Council. Others have come through grants, and we're not done. We're still grant writing. We're still making presentations. But now we're at the point where very soon we'll be reaching out to the community as well as corporate sponsorships. More importantly, we are now at the point where we want to make sure before we start planning the entire design of the monument to start receiving input from the Japanese American community, especially by those who have a special connection to the Tulare County Fairgrounds and the Tulare community. And with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Koji.
Thank you so much, Michael Paul, and thank you to all the students and alumni of the Mission Hill Cultural History class, both for that wonderful presentation and all the work you've been doing to learn about, educate, and create this monument and this great project. I think it's just a real testament to the effort you're putting in, all of the people here today, and to, of course, Michael Paul as a teacher and helping to guide you, and just incredibly impressive. So I just want to start by saying thank you so much to all these incredible students. So for the next portion of this program this evening, I want to introduce a panel of both former incarcerees as well as descendants here to join us, connected to the Tulare Assembly Center. I should note that I myself am a descendant. My grandmother, grandfather, and numerous aunts and uncles were incarcerated at Tulare before being transferred to Gila River. And today with us, we have two former incarcerees, Nancy Bellin and Yoshio Nakamura, joining us, as well as three descendants, Tommy Joe, Naomi Joe Wagner, and Keek Araki Kawaguchi, who are all have familial connections as well with Tulare. I want to start, though, with Yosh and Nancy to maybe share a little bit of their experience about their experience in incarceration and with Tulare. And Yosh, I'm gonna throw it to you first. If you could hear us, Mr. Nakamura, to tell us a little bit about your time at Tulare.
Okay, thank you. Well, I don't know how many of you have ever experienced a really humiliating experience, and that's what happened to me. I was only 11 years old, and I was taken out of my 11th year class at El Monte, and we were put on a train, and the shades had to be closed, and we had no idea where we were going. And when we arrived at Tulare, we were able to get off the train, and then we had to march from the train station to the fairgrounds. And if you can imagine, there are curious residents of Tulare watching the spectacle of these people coming in, the families, children, having to walk from the train station to the fairgrounds. And I would say that having U.S. soldiers stationed very close together, armed, and standing at attention as we passed. And if you can imagine the feeling you would have being accused of something you never did and accused of something you might do. And here we were, families just marching with their belongings. And my wife, Grace Shinoda, was incarcerated in Manzanar, and she recalls seeing this poor man carrying all the diapers and things for his children, and the mother had 2 children on her arms and a couple hanging onto her coat. So my impression of that particular moment is just horrific. I hate to think about it because in my naive, possibly heart, I felt that America is going to discover that this incarceration was a mistake. And when we got to the Assembly Center, we noticed there was barbed wire all around and sentry towers. And so we asked one of the officials, well, why all this, the soldiers are around all armed? And they said, it's for your protection. But if you look closely, you'll discover that from the guard towers all the way around, the guns were pointed inward, not outside. And I would say that one of the most terrifying things that happened to my friend who came from El Monte, and he was a classmate of mine, he drove all the way to Tulare to see me. And when we got there, we had to be in this room with these bars, and he can just talk to us through this little window. And he was so shocked that an innocent guy like me was in this situation that he couldn't talk about it for 30 years. So you can imagine the impact that this had on all of us, because we didn't expect this to be happening to us. We had done nothing wrong. So that's, let's say that sometimes assumptions can be terribly wrong, and that just because we had Japanese faces, they had no idea that all of us had American hearts. So I would say that probably the most humiliating experience in my life was getting off the train and walking to the Assembly Center. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Nakamura, for sharing that with us. And I also want to add that you may notice the cap that Mr. Nakamura is wearing. It would be remiss of me not to mention before moving on that he served in the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, both in Italy and France, and is also an incredible artist. I had the great pleasure of attending an art gallery in Whittier that was presenting Mr. Nakamura's work. So thank you so much for sharing that, your experience with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I want to now give Nancy as well some time, who was also incarcerated at Tulare, and to share her experience in at Poston.
Okay, thank you, and happy to see everybody again. I'm so sorry to hear about Alice. I was so charmed by her and so sorry to hear that she's passed away. I want to say hello to all you boys and girls that I've worked with recently. I had such a pleasure in visiting Michael Paul's classroom. We had an hour and a half of wonderful time together. I was again amazed at how remarkable the job that they're doing, and just amazed that Michael Paul has taken this project as far as it has grown into. It's been very interesting just watching it evolve and to see how far reaching it has been. I've learned more myself, even having been through the experience. I want to say that I was about 7 years old. All of our experiences are very, very different. I think you could possibly interview all of us and we would all have different stories. My mother was 29 years old, a beautiful Japanese woman, and my father was a young 33-year-old farmer who was also an aspiring lawyer. So my experience was quite different. My parents, what I can tell you is a lot of my memories was in preparing to go. I couldn't understand why we were all of a sudden packing up. I'm still living in the house where I was born, and it's a little farm, and we were here. I had lived here for all of my 7 years, and I had a cat that I could not imagine leaving behind. Pets were such a worry, but packing what we could pack and saying, can I take this? And my parents would say, no, you can't take that. And well, can I take this? And no, all we can take is what we can carry. And it just seemed so strange to me. Where could we be going? I would go on an overnight trip to see my aunt and uncles, and we would take more than we were carrying in our 2 suitcases, and we didn't know how long we were going to be gone. But, my parents were so young and worried about any residue that we might have of fear and trying to keep us safe. And I remember one incredible reply when I said, well, can I take this? And it was a little doll. And my dad said, we don't have room for that. But you know what? We're going to all stay together. We don't have to be apart. And I thought, how clever. All of a sudden, it wasn't what I could take. It was just that the most important thing was that we were going to all be together. Families were not going to be separated. And then I thought that is the most important thing. And those subtle differences, I think, made a big difference to me. And when I said, will we be back? Will we be back? And he said, we'll be back. We will be back. And he said it very assured. And I think parents and grandparents can work to make children feel safe. And we were one of the latter people to go. So by the time we got to the Assembly Center, many of the people were already there, but there were long lines waiting there, and everybody had their suitcases and people were waiting around, and everybody was dressed warmly. Everybody was dressed in their best clothing. We didn't know where we were going, but we wanted to make a good impression wherever that was. And I remember seeing the soldiers there, and they all looked like young men. And I said, who are these soldiers? And I remember my dad so poignantly said, they're ours. They're our soldiers, Nancy. So another thing I wanted to share was that before we got there, my father drove us around the community and drove us all around our little community and pointed to our friends, to other farms. And he said, Nancy, remember, these are not the people that are putting us in the camps. These are our friends. They're going to support us. They're going to be here for us. They know us. They know who we are. We're going to be back. And I've never forgotten that. I thought that was such an important security blanket for us. So I do remember we got to the assembly centers in Tulare, and there were these long lines, and there was a lot of confusion. And my father, who was such an exacting, aspiring lawmaker, said, they're never going to be able to keep us all straight. It was such a lot of confusion. And when we did get up there, they didn't have our names on there. And they said, you are supposed to go to Fresno. And so he said this at this point of confusion, he just hoped that our papers were in order somewhere. So we were bused to Fresno then, and our assembly center was in Fresno. So I grew up not knowing very much about the Tulare Assembly Center. And I think this is an incredibly important project because I think even I, who was there as a young child, and some of my friends, we didn't talk about the Tulare Assembly Center. And I think there were like maybe 14 assembly centers in California, 12 to 14. And we certainly should have a memorial there. And I think it's so wise that Michael Paul has gone to the trouble to call us all together to get our input to what it is. And I think we've had suggestions all the way from, a century tower to beautiful gardens. I think that the students are researching and finding everyone's ideas. And I think that it's important historically. I still meet people who have not, in fact, the reason I go to high school classes, I've been doing it for a long time now, and even in elementary classes, is because it was left out of the history books for years. I was still in school when it came in. I was teaching as an instructional consultant when it was finally covered in the social studies book. And at that time, it was only covered on one page and at the fourth grade level, which was really inappropriate. So I wanted to tell students what happened so that not to be bitter, not to be angry, not to have resentment, but just to understand it must never happen again. It was completely illegal. It's what happens in war hysteria when people are, but what can happen with one signature is amazing. So I just think that we all have to stay aware. We learn by history. And thank you, Kojo, for having this project. And to those of you who are on this committee, I'm happy to be a part of it and offer whatever I can. And I think the project and the students are doing just a remarkable job. And I'm happy that we are going to have some input. I'm hoping for a bench where people can sit and read a little bit about it and in a nice, calm, relaxed way and learn about a little bit of history. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Bellin, and for all the work you're doing, going to these classrooms and talking to students and young people so that this history stays present and relevant. And I think there's no more powerful teacher than the testimony of experience. And I really just want to say that's just an incredible thing that you do there.
I wanted to say that the students that are online, they were so open. They touched them. We cried together. We laughed together. We played camp games together. We saw videos. They were so well prepared that we made every moment of that hour and a half that we spent together. Thank you so much to this wonderful teacher. And I feel bonded. I see Nathan there, and I'm thinking that we were able to talk and enjoy each other. And I recognize all the students. And I applaud you for your work and your dedication and what you're doing. It's so important. Thank you so much for letting me be a part of it. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mrs. Bellin, Mr. Nakamura, or Nancy and Yosh, if I may, I think it's just so important to hear those experiences. And I want to then now turn and open it up to the rest of our panel and invite Tommy, Naomi, and Keek, and of course, Yosh and Nancy. Please answer when you want to chime in as well. But just talk about, now that we've heard some of these experiences, we've heard what the students have been doing in this project and where they are. And I just want to get a sense from you all. Why is it important to have a memorial at a place like Tulare? Both after we think about these experiences and maybe the stories that were passed down to you, or not passed down by your families, and their experience at Tulare.
I'll jump in. I'll say too, I'm honored to get to be here with y'all today and learn about this project, Michael Paul's inspiring teaching, students, all of your inspiring work, and celebrate all the work that you're doing. And I'm just my grandparents met at the Tulare Assembly Center, and so I've heard about it and have thought about it only in the abstract. And I think one of the things that I think about is making history sort of more concrete and tangible is something that a memorial can do. I think also just memorial is a great opportunity to educate. Like all the folks here have eyes for education. Educators can bring students to the site as a way to have a conversation about local and American history. Locals are prompted to reflect every time they pass by. Descendants might take trips there to learn more about their family history. And that's to me, that seems very powerful. It creates that opportunity for education, conversation, and reflection. But I'll stop there. And yeah, thank you again for inviting me to come today.
I'll put my sister on the spot because she has to leave early, and then I'll jump in after you.
Why do brothers do that? But again, I first of all want to thank Michael Paul for being the awesome teacher that he is and inspiring the students. But students, how you've taken hold of this, past students, present, and future students. So I just applaud you guys. Also, just the importance of bringing history alive and keeping that in our hearts, not only the physical seeing in books, but going to an assembly center or any of these sites and seeing it just brings it to life and brings awareness. I have done presentations to different high school students and also my own high school students. And I had mentioned this earlier to Michael Paul. I had a high school Caucasian friend whose family grew up in Tulare, and she didn't know what was going on in her. She told me her mom had tears talking about all of a sudden her friends in the farming industry disappeared, and she did not know what happened to them. So I know for her family, this will be a great tribute for them as well. So it's not only for the Japanese Americans, but it's for all people to remember our history.
Yeah, for me, as I think of Tulare Assembly Center, and again, thank you, Michael Paul, and your students are just brilliant, and the way it's coming together, just it's very honoring to our community. And I think the motivation of this is to understand history and context, and so we don't repeat the mistakes again. And we look at the news, we look at what's going on, and potential for collective punishment is right there again, just like we were in 1941, 42. And we have to be the vanguards for this type of atrocity never to happen again. And so, Michael Paul, through this project, I hope that we're just more aware of what's happening in our world and what happened in our world just 80 years ago. And this is America, and it happened to us and by us. And I think we need to be aware. But as I think of Tulare, I think as students need to reflect that that was just a middle ground for something that happened before and then during and then after. And I've been reviewing a lot of photographic history through my family that we have some pretty decent preservation of some history. That our family was in Carpinteria, Summerlin, and my dad graduated from Carp High. Key, I'd love to understand where your grandfather, where your grandfolks were from before, but you know, there's a whole life that they had before camp. And my dad had these really goofy pictures of him playing all the sports because Carp High was so small and he was small, but he played in every sport, you know, football, track, and basketball, which is hilarious. But they had a whole life before camp, that we call it camp. And then the assembly center, and there's very little evidence, photographic evidence, if anything, at Tulare, because it was so it was such a topsy-turvy time, they weren't able to do that. And at that time, photographic material was banned. So there's no photographic evidence we have very little photographic evidence of our family during that period of time. A little side note, my mom's side, they were artists and they did watercolors. And we have watercolors that I can say, oh, I'm standing in parking lot A at San Diego Racetrack looking at the superstructure of the grandstand. And I think an archaeologist would love to see those pictures later, Koji, because I could pinpoint the location based upon the photographs, and it's uncanny. That's all they had. And then as my family went from Tulare to Gila, we have a few more photographic evidence of Gila, and there's faces that we don't know who they are. And just in the last couple of days, I figured out some of those faces and who they are. And then my family was put into Crystal City family camp. And that was an actual internment camp because of my grandfather's some doings in Mexico. And but in Crystal City, there was this one picture of a girl who was Miss Crystal City, this really cute Japanese girl. And it said Hosaka. And I don't know if Nancy, you know who this Hosaka clan is, but I go, who's, and I talk to my friend and I go, is this the same Hosakas from Reedley, California, in which we hunted with in the 1970s and 80s? And sure enough, there's two Japanese girls that had my father's name on it and said Ken, and then just said the first name, didn't say their last names. And I was able to put those two photographs together and say that indeed was the Hosaka girls, well, you know, and put these random pictures together into stories that are now indelible in our families. And then I was mentioning during the pre discussion, Mr. Nakamura emailed me about, are you related to Sei and Ken? And Ken is my dad. And apparently my dad planted a tree. What type of tree was that again? A tree in Mr. Nakamura's yard. And it's now a famous tree, which we have to visit. So what I'm kind of illustrating, Tulare is a middle ground. There was a whole life of Japanese Americans before, and there's the trauma during the camps, and there's a whole life that happened afterwards. And our community is knit together in some very odd way because of this whole incarceration experience. And you students that are retelling the story and preserving the story really helps us link our community together. And I just really, really appreciate, I think we all really appreciate what you're doing and the story that it tells.
Yosh, did you want to chime in about the tree in your yard that?
Well, yeah. Tommy's father helped me landscape my yard, and I believe it was about 1966 when the Canary Island pine was put in the ground by his father, Ken, and it's now sort of a landmark in our area because it's really tall, and I have to trim it quite often because the wind could knock it over and make a few dents in my house. So, but it makes a nice little landmark. If we're lost, look for that tree. So, and Ken's family has been really very much in the leadership role of our camp community, and his father was more like an elder statesman for the rest of us, a little younger, and his uncle Sei organized all kinds of reunions for the fellows and women and children living in either Tulare or later we were transferred to the Gila camp. And it's a great place if you like dust and heat. Well, anyway, it was really heartwarming to me to find out that Tommy's father is someone I knew, and his uncles and their families. They did a lot to get us together for camp reunions. And believe it or not, those terrible experiences were put aside when we were friends. We made friends and we would get together. So out of something terrible, there's some nice things do happen.
Yeah, I think that's so important, the role that these community ties have played to sustain people through the camp experience and afterwards, and dealing with the memory of camp. And Nancy, I saw your hand go up. You wanted to say something.
I wanted to tell you that when we had the evacuation sales, which we called, everybody had to get rid of everything so quickly, and we had interviewed people to come and stay in our homes quickly, who wanted to stay in our homes rent-free or whatever arrangements. And of all the people that came, I begged for the people that were the kindest to my cat, Chang, because I was so worried about who was going to feed Chang and be nice to Chang. And we went with them, and they turned out to be not as
responsible and kind as we thought. And we heard in camps that Chang had in fact died, and they didn't want me writing anymore, asking if Chang was okay. So I was so sad. I remember that time in camp. I just want to say that when we came home 3 years later, this ratty cat, Chang was a beautiful little white Persian cat, and this ratty cat came in back to the house, and it was in fact Chang. We cleaned him up. He became white and Persian again, and we heard that he was a ghost cat running in the orchards. And so I want to say Chang knew when we came home, and he kept the faith. And it was just like one of the neighbors tried to catch him for us, and the students asked. That was one of the most poignant questions of all the political questions and the property ownerships and what happened to property. The students said, "What about your pets? What did you do with your pets? Did you have a pet that you had to leave behind?" And I think students get right down to the heart of what is really important. And I think that you're on the right track, Michael Paul. And we are so happy. We've got a wonderful local artist, Sam Pena, and he's doing this bas relief. And his interpretation will be sensitive. It will really evoke that feeling. It will be beyond what you can expect. It will be more than 2 bronze statues. He really puts so much into his artwork, and we're going to be thrilled with what he comes up with, too. I just want to endorse his work. He's an old friend, and he is one of the most prolific artists in Washington, D.C. His big medallions are all around the White House, and so we're lucky to have him. So again, kudos for getting him, Michael Paul. Kudos.
And so, building off of that comment, I want to ask all of you here today, what do you hope to see in a memorial at Tulare, and what would you like to see incorporated into such a memorial as the students and Michael Paul and Mr. Pena are working on developing this memorial at Tulare?
Well, we hope the memorial will remind us of some of the mistakes we made, and that we won't let this happen again. So let that memorial be a reminder of some mistakes we have made. Even the Congress and the president at the time, Ronald Reagan, apologized for the actions of the government in putting us in these camps. So I'd say that it's very important that this sort of news to many people gets out. I want to mention one thing. I was a teacher, and I was lucky to be hired in a district. Was in Whittier at the time, but I had a difficulty getting a job because they looked at my name and they said, the faculty committee is interested in you very much, but we're afraid the board may not like the name, Japanese name coming up to the board. And while I was teaching, students would ask me about what happened to me during the war. And if I explain a little bit, some of my colleagues thought they were protecting me. They would come up and tell me, you shouldn't talk about being incarcerated by the U.S. government. It sounds un-American. So anyway, that's how things have changed. And I think that I'm very proud of the fact that I came in at the tail end of the war, but as a result, I got to know quite a few fellows in the 442nd and the 100th Battalion. And what they did really created a buffer to what was happening propaganda-wise against Japanese. And when I was in the service, and if I run into any other soldier, he would ask me, what company are you with, or what outfit? And when I said 442nd, they really respected the 442nd. So I think that helped change the attitude of people looking at the Japanese face as an American. They couldn't quite understand that, and that's probably one of the reasons why the 442nd did so well, is that the soldiers knew they had to prove that they are loyal Americans. So I think there are some positive things that happen, even though in the midst of a lot of propaganda against anyone with the Japanese name.
Thank you. And as you mentioned, being a former teacher, I think almost everybody on this panel coincidentally is a teacher of some capacity or an educator. And in that vein, I want to continue this question of, I guess, what do you hope to see in the monument, and how do you hope those, especially who maybe aren't Japanese American and not familiar with this history, will take away from the monument? Yosh mentioned the idea that to remind us that this was a mistake, that this shouldn't have happened. And what other things do you all hope a visitor to Tulare County Fairgrounds will take away when seeing a monument like this?
I think it's important to have certain statistics. I mean, when we say that there were many people incarcerated right there on the fairgrounds, that's one thing. But when you hear that there was almost 5,000 people kept there for several weeks, and there were 6.5-foot barbed wire fence and 8 guard tires, that speaks to people. And now, if it's in a peaceful setting where the Japanese American people have so melded and become such a part of the community, I think those numbers are shocking, but it gives you something to hang on to. And then you see the young people that are, so many of the people in my generation didn't talk about it. I was so lucky that our parents really talked about it. They took us back to the camps. My father found barrack 326 and pointed right to it and said, this was our barrack, Nancy. But now, now you can't even find a barrack. So I think that history with the numbers, somehow we have to use those numbers so that the young people today have something to hang on to, but they also see themselves as it's history. We can't forget that. We mustn't forget it. And as Tommy says, with all the potential for the hysteria and harm that it can do even today, we're right at that cutting edge again when we can make that difference and remind them. And I salute the young people who are having the courage to say, wait a minute, there's a story that needs to be told here. We kind of skipped a generation because it was a disgrace and something to be quiet about. And now we have proven ourselves. And so it's come full circle. So I think to have a few real historical stats engraved right there. Sam is great about putting factual information down in a very synoptic way. So I think that would be good to have some information right there where people can sit and actually read about it. What do you think, Naomi?
I think you're right on. Those historical statistics are very important, but to me, it goes beyond actually Tulare. So to have the statistics of having 125,284 people that were incarcerated, to add that into it, so it's much broader. I mean, that they started with the assembly centers, but it went much broader and it included much more people. So,
Tom and Keek.
Yeah. I'll just double down. So I think all those ideas sound great. And one of the questions I often come back to when I think about, this historical event, sort of American project of dehumanizing a subpopulation of people, relocation and imprisonment on this grand scale. The thing I think about is, how did internees reconstruct their dignity? And one of the things I find to be so incredible and inspiring are the ways in which folks who were in prison there kept their spirits and dignity alive through work, community building, creative activities, education, and the ways in which they sort of like mobilized all their talents sort of keep the community thriving to the degree it could. And so if there's a way to somehow capture some of those stories, I feel like that could be an inspiring part of the memorial too.
I'd like to just commend the teachers and the students for pursuing this. I think it's just a marvelous thing, and it gives me hope for the future.
Definitely.
I think Nancy's book coming out will be the key element for talking about preserving dignity. Your stories are amazing. I think they need to be told. So in addition to what was aforementioned in the elements of the memorial, the other greater context that Naomi was talking about, some of the numbers that we're talking about, but also like a lot of people don't understand the scope of the West Coast and the exclusion zone, how big of an area that was and what you were told to go into. Like, that's a huge swath of land that we were forcibly removed from. And I think that's a scale that we need to understand. Visually, I don't know very many places that incorporate that art. The initial panel that I saw in your presentation, where you're having people carry the stuff through, and that gate is very moving. So something that would incorporate another panel like that. It doesn't have to be that panel, but it could be just an educational panel. But that's just a thought. I have many thoughts, but don't action on all of it. But it's just an idea. Oh, one other thing too, being at Crystal City, Texas, multiple times, it's a very hot and very UV area. I mean, the sun beats down hard, very similar to, the valley. So consideration of timeless pieces of weathering. I know you probably have taken that into consideration, but you're all from the valley, you understand that issue, but things fade fast in that type of environment.
Certainly, and we're coming up towards the end of our time here together. If there are any burning last questions that somebody wants to throw into the chat to be sure to ask the panelists, please throw them right now, and we'll try to see if we can get to one or maybe two questions before we close off. But I also want to give a little bit of time to Michael Paul to just give people some information of how can they stay tuned into this, where can they contact folks, as more people who are here at the panel or who couldn't make it and maybe watch a recording of it want to be involved in this larger dialogue around Tulare, around the memorial project. How do people contact you, and how can they get involved?
Yes, thank you for bringing that up, Koji. I just want to say, this might be my last opportunity to speak here, that not only have I overcome with inspiration, both by the students and by our guests tonight, I'm overcome with emotion, both sad, both angry, but most importantly, with positivity, of what the potential of this monument like this can do, and the communities that it can bring together and educate. The first month of the school year in the cultural history class, these last several years since we've been doing the project, I've dedicated the first month of school to learn about Japanese American incarceration. And I try to cover all aspects of this history, not just of the incarceration, not just of the struggle, but also of the triumph. And one of the things that we really focus on are the contributions of the young men in particular, who, despite their families being imprisoned, decided to step forward and said, I will fight for this country. Even though my family continues to remain in prison, I'm going to go and fight for this country because, and what we've learned from you, people like you, Mr. Nakamura, is that we want America to follow through with its promise of justice, right, and equality for all of us. And you and members of the 442nd Regiment, I think, embody that commitment and your willingness to make the ultimate sacrifice. So one of the lessons that we do is when I was in Manzanar last summer, I bought 2 books that highlight the contributions and stories of members of the 442nd. And in this book, it beautifully highlights veterans and their stories, personal stories and photographs. And among those who we learn about is none other than Mr. Nakamura. And do you recognize this picture, Mr. Nakamura?
Yes.
Yeah.
We had an exhibit of those pictures at the U.S. Army Museum of World War II in New Orleans, and it was pretty well received there. And Shane Sopler did a very good job of photographing the veterans.
He certainly did, and so it is a huge honor for me. But I know I speak for the students to have an opportunity to meet you as well as those who were directly impacted by this history or their families. So it's an honor to have also had Mrs. Nancy Bellin come to our classroom and to share her stories as well. And it's an honor to have met and become friends with descendants, as well as including our other guests that are here tonight. And my hope is, and I know the hope of our students is that hopefully soon, when we have the ribbon cutting of this ceremony at the memorial, we'll get to see you all again in person as you come to participate and to see this for the first time. So thank you so very much. I know in preparation for this event this evening, Koji and others, Kimiko, we had conversations about the necessity to have different perspectives, especially those who experience this from the Japanese American community, to have a very involved role in the development and the design of this monument. And so we've invited Koji to kind of spearhead the networking and gathering meetings possibly into the future. For those of you who are in the audience who would like to have a more involved role in the planning and the development of this, Koji, if you won't mind sending out maybe your email, if you'd like to contact me directly to learn more about different ways in which you can directly support the students in our goal in educating the community. I will also put in the chat room my email address. I'll even put out my cell phone number if you'd like to contact us directly. You're more than welcome to.
Thank you. And Nancy, I see your hand.
Just tell you one more thing quickly. You said it's a 442nd story. I have to tell you, my uncle, George Miyake, was in the 442nd. And when I asked him about it, he said he was a cook. And I said, oh, shucks, you were just a cook? And he said, are you kidding me, Nancy? Every member of the 442nd was a combat soldier. So don't you ever say, well, you're just a cook. So I just want to tell you that I have such respect for you. And that book looks absolutely fabulous. I'm anxious to see it myself. And I want to thank Tommy. Tommy, I was so nervous coming in today. You always have a way to diffuse my nervousness. And I just want to thank you. And I hope we have a chance to interact with each other a little bit more. You were good for me today. Thank you so much. And Koji, your project is amazing. This is really, really the heart of what's going on too, I know. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you everybody who's been dropping comments into the chat. I've thrown out my email in there. I know Michael Paul has also thrown out his contact information. There are some questions about applying for a JAX grant. Michael Paul, I'm not sure if you have, they've looked into applying for the Japanese American Confinement Sites grant, as well as suggestions of places to do more research, including the Tulare Advanced Register for articles and photos. Well, thank you, everybody. I want to be respectful of everybody's time, and especially our wonderful panelists who've taken some time out of their Sunday here to talk to you all. Thank you so much for coming out tonight, and I hope, again, this isn't a capstone or an end of a conversation, but really the beginning of larger dialogues that we can keep going and moving forward as we talk about the possibilities of remembering Tulare and educating and keeping the stories that we all have, that we've told, alive and active in our communities. So thank you everybody for coming out, and thank you especially Naomi, Tommy, Keek, Yosh, Nancy, Michael Paul, and all the students of the cultural history class from Mission Oak High School, past, present, and to be, as well as our wonderful organizers of Tadaima, who made all of this evening possible with their incredible work and tolerance of my delayed emailing back and returning of their requests for information. So thank you everybody so much for coming out tonight. And we look forward to keeping this conversation moving forward. Have a good night, everybody.